The Canadians had done the impossible. Enemy defenses collapsed. Forward lines broken. Signals of success crackled through field radios. For a brief moment, victory felt close enough to touch. Then the order arrived. Withdraw. Not because they were defeated, not because the plan had failed, but because a greater calculation had been made. Thousands of miles away, Winston Churchill read the report in silence. The breakthrough, the withdrawal, the consequences. One decision had shifted the battlefield. What Churchill declared next would test alliance, pride, and the meaning of leadership in wartime. Like the video, I subscribed to the channel. The breakthrough had not been accidental. For weeks, Canadian forces had prepared carefully. Supplies moved forward. Reconnaissance studied terrain. Artillery coordination was timed with precision. When the moment came, the advance was swift and disciplined. Enemy positions that had resisted for months suddenly faltered. Communications posts were disrupted. Defensive strongpoints were bypassed. Canadian units moved deeper than expected. Officers reported steady progress. Momentum was building. For the soldiers on the ground, it felt like history turning. Victory is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet confidence spreading across a line of men who realize they are winning. Then came the signal from higher command. Withdraw to secondary positions. The message was clear. Immediate compliance required. Confusion spread first among junior officers. They checked coordinates, confirmed transmission codes. There was no mistake. This was not a retreat in panic. It was a strategic withdrawal. But timing matters in war. Momentum once gained is fragile. General Douglas MacArthur had reviewed broader intelligence reports. Enemy reinforcements were mobilizing beyond the immediate front. Supply lines were extending beyond optimal reach. Communications risked overstretch. A deeper advance might have produced a dramatic headline. It might also have produced isolation. MacArthur understood something critical. A breakthrough unsupported by logistics can become a trap. He chose preservation over risk. On paper, it was logical. On the battlefield, it felt different. Canadian soldiers began the disciplined process of repositioning. No chaos, no disorder. Equipment recovered. Defensive lines re-established. Casualties evacuated carefully. Professionals follow orders, even when pride resists. But morale is shaped by perception. And perception travels faster than bullets. News of the withdrawal moved quickly through Allied channels. In London, Winston Churchill received the formal briefing. He read it twice, then a third time. He understood two truths immediately. First, the Canadians had performed exceptionally. Second, if misinterpreted, this withdrawal could damage confidence, both among troops and among the public. Coalition warfare is delicate. Different commanders, different national pride, different strategic cultures. Unity is not automatic. It must be maintained. Churchill did not view the situation emotionally. He viewed it politically and strategically at the same time. The Canadians needed recognition. MacArthur needed authority respected. The alliance needed stability. This was not simply about ground gained or lost. It was about trust. He began drafting his response. Not to criticize, not to interfere, but to frame the narrative. Language in wartime is as powerful as artillery. If the withdrawal appeared as hesitation, morale could dip. If it appeared as calculated strength, confidence could endure. Churchill chose his words carefully. He acknowledged the bravery and precision of the Canadian forces. He described the breakthrough as evidence of Allied capability and resolve. He then affirmed the strategic reasoning behind consolidation of positions. He did not use the language of retreat. He used the language of preparation. Preparation for sustained success. Preparation for coordinated advance. Preparation for long-term victory. That distinction mattered. Back on the front lines, Canadian troops stabilized their new positions. Officers reassured their men. The mission had not failed. It had demonstrated strength. The enemy now understood Canadian capability. That knowledge alone shifted calculations. War is not only about territory, it is about pressure. And pressure had been applied effectively. Churchill knew something else as well. Breakthroughs test leaders, not when they happen, but when deciding what to do next. Boldness inspires. restraint preserves. Great leadership requires both. And in that moment, what Churchill declared would define how history remembered the decision, not as lost opportunity, but as disciplined strategy within a united alliance. The battlefield had shifted, but the larger war was still unfolding, and words, carefully chosen, would shape what came next. The message Churchill sent was not dramatic. It was deliberate. In war, tone matters as much as tactics. A single phrase can strengthen resolve or quietly fracture it. Churchill understood that the Canadian breakthrough had created more than a military moment. It had created expectation. Expectation among soldiers. Expectation among commanders. Expectation among civilians reading headlines. If that expectation turned into doubt, the damage would travel far beyond the battlefield. So he framed the event not as a halted advance, but as proof of Allied superiority. He described the Canadian action as a demonstration of strength that forced the enemy to reconsider their own positions. He emphasized coordination, discipline, and professionalism. He made it clear that the operation had achieved its purpose: to test, to pressure, to expose weaknesses. What had been gained was knowledge, and knowledge wins wars. Privately, Churchill also sought clarity. He requested a full operational summary from MacArthur's headquarters, not as criticism, but as confirmation. The alliance depended on transparency. British, American, and Canadian forces were fighting under a shared objective. Strategic alignment was not optional. MacArthur responded with characteristic confidence. His explanation was precise. Enemy reserves were moving faster than anticipated. Air reconnaissance suggested armored units preparing counteraction. Supply projections indicated risk if forward units advanced further without reinforcement. He believed consolidation now would enable a stronger push later. Churchill read the response carefully. He did not challenge it, but he understood perception must be managed. Because soldiers measure progress in ground, politicians measure progress in headlines. Strategists measure progress and sustainability. Those three measures do not always align. Meanwhile, in Canadian camps, conversations continued quietly. Some soldiers replayed the breakthrough in their minds. The moment the defensive line cracked, the signal flares, the sudden shift in resistance. They had felt momentum. Momentum feels like destiny. But seasoned officers reminded them of a truth. Wars are not won in single surges. They are won in phases. A breakthrough tests the enemy. A consolidation prepares the next move. Discipline held firm. There were no public complaints. No breakdown in structure. Canadian units reinforced secondary positions with professionalism. Engineers improved defensive placements. Supply lines tightened. Communication networks strengthened. Preparation replaced adrenaline. And sometimes, preparation is more powerful than charge. Across Allied command circles, discussions intensified. Some argued the advance could have continued. Others supported the withdrawal as prudent. Churchill listened to all sides. He had seen too many campaigns fail because leaders mistook courage for invulnerability. He also knew that unity mattered more than individual validation. If British leadership publicly questioned American command decisions, cracks could appear. If Canadian contributions seemed minimized, resentment could grow. He chose balance. In a public address days later, Churchill spoke of Allied coordination. He praised Canadian determination. He described recent operations as evidence of gathering, strength, and tightening resolve. He did not mention the word withdrawal. He spoke instead of measured advance. Language shapes memory, and memory shapes morale. The enemy, observing from across the lines, had also noticed. They had felt the breakthrough. They had seen the coordination. Even though the Canadians stepped back, the message was delivered clearly. Allied forces could penetrate hardened positions. That realization forced them to redistribute resources. Sometimes the impact of an operation lies not in territory held, but in confidence shaken. Churchill understood that. MacArthur understood that. The Canadians had proven it. Still, there was unfinished tension. What if reinforcements had been delayed? What if the window of opportunity had been larger than estimated? History often revolves around questions without clear answers. But leadership is not about perfect foresight. It is about informed judgment. And judgment, in coalition warfare, must protect more than a single front. It must protect the alliance itself. In the weeks that followed, planning intensified. Future operations were redesigned with stronger logistical support. Air coordination improved. Supply distribution expanded. The breakthrough had not been wasted. It had been studied, refined, absorbed into a larger strategy. Churchill later remarked privately that wars are rarely decided by one dramatic moment. They are decided by accumulation, pressure applied steadily, strength built patiently, unity preserved deliberately. The Canadians had shown what they could do. MacArthur had preserved what he would need, and Churchill had ensured that the story told about the moment strengthened, rather than weakened, the Allied cause. But the next phase would test them all again, because in war every decision echoes, and sometimes the echo is louder than the original sound. The maps were redrawn, not dramatically, not with sweeping arrows across continents, but with small, deliberate adjustments. Those adjustments mattered. In Allied headquarters, planners began reviewing the breakthrough again, not as a lost opportunity, but as a preview. The Canadian advance had exposed weaknesses in enemy coordination. Defensive timing had faltered. Communication between their forward and reserve units had shown delay. That delay was valuable, because delay is vulnerability. MacArthur's staff compiled after-action reports with meticulous detail, timelines, artillery response intervals, reinforcement movement speeds, air reconnaissance overlays. Every minute of the breakthrough was analyzed. The conclusion was quiet but powerful. The line could be broken again, but next time it would require deeper supply assurance, synchronized air coverage, and reserve mobility ready to exploit success immediately. This was no longer theory. It was data earned under pressure. Meanwhile, Canadian commanders adjusted their approach. They trained for rapid consolidation after breakthrough. Engineers practiced accelerated bridge and road construction. Signal units improved redundancy to prevent communication lag. They were not discouraged. They were preparing. On the political side, Churchill continued reinforcing the narrative of controlled strength. In meetings with Allied leaders, he emphasized patience without weakness. "We must strike," he reportedly said, "but we must strike in rhythm. Rhythm in war is underestimated. Attack too soon and momentum collapses. Attack too late and opportunity fades. The challenge is timing." Churchill knew the public did not see maps layered with logistics calculations. They saw headlines. They saw advances and withdrawals. It was his responsibility to ensure those headlines supported confidence. So he highlighted Canadian resilience. He spoke of disciplined advance and disciplined consolidation. He framed the campaign as cumulative pressure, not isolated actions. Behind the scenes, coordination deepened. British planners worked with American logisticians. Canadian commanders shared ground-level assessments. The breakthrough had become a catalyst, not for blame, but for synchronization. And synchronization wins wars. Across the front, the enemy adjusted too. Reinforcements were repositioned toward the sector where the Canadians had advanced. Defensive structures were reinforced. Patrol activity increased. They had learned something from the breakthrough. They had learned that the Allied front was capable of concentrated precision. That knowledge forced them to stretch resources thinner across the line. Pressure spreads an opponent's strength, and spread strength weakens resistance. Weeks later, new operations began, not identical, but informed by experience. Supply corridors were strengthened before the first shot was fired. Air cover was aligned with ground phases. Reserve units were pre-positioned for exploitation. When the next advance came, it was steadier, less dramatic in its opening moments, more sustained in its impact. Canadian troops once again demonstrated disciplined coordination, but this time logistical depth supported them fully. Reinforcements were ready. Engineering units followed closely behind. Ground gained was held. Momentum was extended. MacArthur observed carefully. Churchill received updates regularly. Both men understood that this phase was not about headlines. It was about durability. The earlier withdrawal had prevented overextension. Now, the offensive could continue with stability. For the Canadian soldiers who had felt the sting of stepping back weeks earlier, this phase carried quiet vindication. They had not retreated from failure. They had repositioned for endurance. And endurance is often the true measure of strength. In private correspondence, Churchill expressed satisfaction, not at territory alone, but at cohesion. The alliance had navigated a tense moment without fracture. Command authority remained intact. Canadian contribution was respected. American strategic judgment was preserved. No cracks, only reinforcement. History rarely remembers the meetings, the letters, the recalculations. It remembers the victories. But victories are built in rooms filled with quiet decisions. The breakthrough had tested leadership. The withdrawal had tested unity. The renewed advance proved the system worked. War is not a straight line. It bends with circumstance. It adapts with intelligence. It survives through cooperation. And in this case, what Churchill declared after the withdrawal helped shape what followed, not as a setback, but as a step in rhythm. The battlefield moved forward again, not because of pride, not because of impulse, but because preparation met opportunity. And when preparation meets opportunity, momentum returns, stronger than before. By the time the campaign moved into its later stages, few people remembered the tension of that first withdrawal. They remembered the steady advance that followed. They remembered coordination. They remembered the growing sense that Allied forces were no longer reacting. They were shaping events. But inside leadership circles, that earlier moment was never forgotten, because it had revealed something deeper than tactics. It had revealed character. Coalition warfare is built on trust that cannot be measured in maps. British, American, and Canadian forces operated under shared purpose, but different traditions, different temperaments, different political pressures. One rash accusation could fracture confidence. One careless speech could weaken unity. One public disagreement could ripple across oceans. Churchill understood this instinctively. His declaration after the withdrawal did more than protect morale. It protected alignment. He refused to let the narrative drift toward division. He did not allow pride to override prudence. He did not allow disappointment to overshadow achievement. Instead, he reframed the moment as evidence of strength guided by judgment, and history would quietly confirm the wisdom of that approach. As later offensives unfolded, Canadian forces earned a reputation for reliability and discipline under pressure. Their ability to execute both advance and consolidation made them trusted within broader Allied strategy. MacArthur's emphasis on sustainability over spectacle also gained validation. Campaigns that followed were supported with stronger logistical foundations. Momentum, once gained, was extended instead of gambled. The lesson was subtle. Victory is not always about pushing as far as possible. Sometimes it is about knowing when to pause so that progress can continue. In the years after the war, analysts revisited moments like this. They debated whether the breakthrough could have been expanded more aggressively. They questioned whether opportunity had been briefly within reach. But most serious historians arrived at a shared understanding. A single advance rarely determines a war. Systems do. Coordination does. Endurance does. The Allied coalition succeeded not because every decision was bold, but because most decisions were balanced. Churchill's declaration represented that balance. He praised courage without encouraging recklessness. He respected command authority without surrendering strategic oversight. He strengthened unity instead of feeding tension. And that approach mattered far beyond one battlefield. For the Canadian soldiers involved, the memory evolved over time. What once felt like interrupted momentum became part of a larger story, like a story of contribution within a disciplined, coordinated effort that ultimately achieved its objectives. No soldier fights only for ground. They fight for trust in leadership. They fight for belief that their effort serves a purpose beyond the immediate horizon. Churchill ensured that belief remained intact. Leadership in war is often judged by victories, but sometimes it is defined by restraint, by measured words spoken at critical moments, by decisions that prevent cracks before they form. The breakthrough demonstrated capability. The withdrawal demonstrated discipline. The declaration demonstrated wisdom. Together, they formed something stronger than a headline. They formed cohesion, and cohesion wins wars. In the end, what Churchill declared was not a dramatic proclamation meant for applause. It was a steady affirmation of unity, strength, and calculated progress. He understood that alliances do not survive on ambition alone. They survive on trust. And in that quiet exchange between battlefield and statesman, trust was preserved. History rarely pauses to highlight such moments. But without them, greater victories might never arrive. Because in war, as in leadership, timing matters. Judgment matters. And the strength to balance courage with caution may be the most powerful weapon of all.